Good afternoon. Is that better? Thank you all for coming out. I know this is an extremely busy time for all of us. I appreciate everyone showing up today to go over the 403B plan enhancements that we have planned for our upcoming July 1 target date. We have put in a great deal of work over the past few months of making these enhancements to the 403B plan, and wanted to take the opportunity today to go over that with you, particularly now, this time of year, as we get toward the end of the semester, and our faculty will be leaving for the summer, and so we wanted to have, even though the plan changes don't start till July 1, we wanted to take the opportunity to give you as much time to explore and learn about what the options are going to be going forward. And when we do that, that way you have some time and you're not rushed to try to make those decisions. So we are going to have a presentation. I'm going to introduce our speakers with us today, and then we'll close out with time for a question and answer session with you all. With us today, we are very fortunate to have, before I get into the speaker introductions, let me talk a little bit about our process. The Board of Directors and the Board of Trustees for the university are called fiduciaries. And what that basically means is that they're responsible for everything as it relates to the plan. And we began investigating the plan and plan design because of wanting to make sure that we were doing what was in the best interest of the employees and the plan. And the way that we did that is that we invited CAMAC. You'll get to meet Joey Payne with CAMAC. He offered to do an assessment of our plan for us, and he'll be talking a little bit today about best practices as it relates to retirement plans. And because of some of those best practices that are out there, the decision was made by the Board of Trustees in February that we would go from a 2-vendor school or plan down to the 1 vendor. And we'll talk a little bit more later on today about the reason we made that decision, but there are some cost components to that, and we want to make sure that we're able to offer our employees at the most efficient amount of money as we possibly can for you as an option. And one of the ways that we can do that is to streamline, and instead of dividing between TIA and VALIC, we are now going to actually go only and strictly with VALIC, effective July 1. So with that, I want to introduce a couple of our speakers, and then I'll let them come up and kind of take over. Joey Payne is with CAMAC Retirement. He leads a team of consultants and account managers who serve the retirement needs for a variety of clients. They have a focus on public and private higher education institution. In addition to the work that Joey does now with CAMAC, he has a 20-year history as a plan administrator with 401ks, 403bs, 457s, and those are all acronyms that we throw around. But needless to say, he has a great deal of experience in the world of higher education and the retirement plans affiliated with the various institutions that he's been affiliated with and that he's served. So we're thrilled to have Joey with us, and we're thrilled to have Joey on the team for Midway as we move forward with our plan adjustments. Also with us today, we have Don Kohler. He's the VALIC Vice President Relationship Manager, and he's our key executive with our Midway University plan. Don has been with us a number of years, and so over the last 2 years since I've been here, he's been a very valuable player in our 403B plan, as well as a great resource to the institution, and we appreciate that. He's a registered representative, and he also serves as the VALIC Relationship Manager with Morehead State University, Eastern, Western, and Murray, as well as some additional VALIC clients. In addition to Don being with us today, we have Mark Spinoza, and some of you who are already VALIC participants may know Mark. Mark will be our on-site, on-campus person. He's a great resource to any of you who, as we move forward with our 403B plan, and you'll get to have an opportunity to speak individually with him as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to welcome Don to the podium, and we'll go from there.
No, we should be good. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out today. My role in the presentation and discussion today will be to walk you through the varying elements that Trish has alluded to regarding plan enhancements, and I want to just stay focused on that term, enhancements. This isn't really a change as much as it's a part of an ongoing due diligence effort that the university has been a party to for a number of years. This is just the latest element of that. When I first came on board in terms of supporting Midway University, we were in the process of rolling out the match savings plan under the Safe Harbor condition, which I believe was in 2014. And then this fairly significant due diligence platform was really focused on trying to make sure that you had best-of-class investments and a corresponding communication and education strategy that is very focused on Midway. What we see with smaller schools is that sometimes you're not getting the same level of support and service that some of the larger institutions do. And we don't think that's right. We think that it's very, very important to bring the same resources to bear for this institution. So we're real pleased to kind of get things kicked off today. The agenda will follow basically the things that are generally on a person's mind at this point as we announce some of these changes. What's changing? What are the dates of those changes? What are participant actions? What do you have to think about yourself around those changes? And then as well some detailed information that we'll finish up with. So let me dive in as to what's happening as a part of this change. Effective 7/1/2018, July 1st, we're going to kind of cross over into the new plan from the old plan. What are the benefits to this organization and its employees? First, and we've had feedback from faculty and staff here at Midway around the term annuity. Annuity is a contract issued by an insurance company that currently is the investment vehicle that everyone has their money in for both TIA and VALIC. We're going to be transitioning to something referred to as an open architecture mutual fund platform, and I'll kind of break down what that means. Open architecture is the institution will for the first time be able to look at all 11 to 12,000 mutual funds that exist in the marketplace and pick out best-of-class investments through the leadership of CAMAG and make sure that you always have what is deemed to be best practice funds available for you to build your portfolios and create a diversified set of investments for yourself. The second thing that Trish mentioned is that we'll also have the opportunity to now start to expand scale. Meaning when we had two different providers and money in two different sections, you weren't creating scale quickly, and you were then paying potentially more than you could if we combined those asset pools into one record-keeping system. And so one of the things that we'll see over time is a reduction in the cost of investment, which keeps more money in your pocket and growing for your future. So we really applaud Midway for going through that due diligence effort. Independent third-party investment platform. I won't try to steal Joey's thunder. He'll talk to you a little bit about the investment platform that's been created for Midway, but just know that you're going to have a partner looking over the shoulder of Midway, trying to help make sure that the investments are always best in class. You don't build it once and leave it there. You constantly monitor it and occasionally change out the investments that are going to keep you on the right path for retirement. The last thing that I'll suggest within the agenda is, or within this section, is moving to a more contemporary and integrated communication and education program. Today it's primarily more so you reaching out to us and or TIA to get the information. You're going to see a change in how that information is now delivered in a more proactive way, more digital communication, more proactive push of information to make sure that you're reminded of the things that you need to think about to have a secure financial future. So let me take you through what's not changing. And this is very important, I think, to hear from the university and from our group. The general plan design change is 714. So what happens all the way up from, we've been a plant vendor here since 1985, for 33 years, and have accumulated assets in these annuity structures. What's not changing is that those assets will be retained in those pools, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Additionally, what's not changing is the plan design. And I thought I'd take a quick minute just to walk you through the very competitive plan design that's offered to you here at Midway, referred to as a 403B retirement plan. First, employee contributions. You have the opportunity to defer money from your own paycheck and save for your retirement. And there's two ways in which that's done here. Pre-tax, which is the more traditional way that you're used to over a long period of time. Additionally, more and more folks are looking at Roth. So you can do pre-tax contributions or you can do after-tax Roth contributions. The difference between the two is the taxation on the way in and the taxation on the way out. A Roth contribution goes in after tax at that point of entry, and if you hold it for 5 years and you're 59 and a half or older when you remove it, it's tax-free. So we always like to sit and understand your financial situation to determine not only how much to contribute, but how to actually put that into the right position, pre-tax or Roth. Eligibility. A lot of times retirement plans have an eligibility standard where you don't start receiving contribution from your employer for a year. Here, your eligibility for the vast majority of the employees is immediate. So the 403B plan here, as soon as you gain entry as an employee into the organization, you can begin contributing and you're immediately eligible for the match. And what is the match? The match is 100% of the first 3 that you put in and 50 cents on the dollar for the next 2%. So if an employee is doing 5% or more contributed, whether it's pre-tax or Roth, they'll have a 4% contribution from the employer. So their 5 plus the 4 from the employer gets everybody on track for at least 9% total contribution. So we want to make sure we're also motivating participation as best you can, because we'll all need the money when we retire. Retirement plan contributions from earnings prior to July 1st, as I mentioned a moment ago, they're going to remain in the investments in which you have directed them up to this point. So whether that be with VALIC or TIAA, those pools of money are controlled by you as a plan participant. So you're permitted the right to keep that pool of money where it is or direct it to the new platform. And we'll talk about how that's done in a minute. So the new plan enrollment process and participant actions, here's the action items, and there will be additional communication that goes out to everybody here over the course of the next couple of months. The first thing to know is that a strategic decision was made on behalf of the board and the HR leadership group to have everybody re-enroll in the plan. And this was done for good reason. What re-enroll means is that each person who wishes to have a continuance of their salary reduction, so let's say there's 80 people on campus who are already contributing, each of those people have to sign a new form so that effective in July, your contributions continue to be made and there won't be any disruption in that deferral. You'll also have the right, of course, to change it. Bring it down, move it to a higher amount, or increase it. So that's the first thing that everybody has to do between now and the first payroll that this is effective for, which is 7/20 of 2018. The second thing is we're going to ask that you go to our enrollment site at VALIC, and this will be distributed to you with a specific enrollment code. And here you're going to set up your permanent account with VALIC. Most of the information will already be there. You're registering for that account, and you're going to affirm how you'd like those investments to be allocated. And Mark Spinoza, our representative, will be on campus quite a bit in the months of May and June to help coach on that particular topic. And we'll talk about that over the course of the next couple of months. The second thing beyond selecting your investment allocation when you set up these new accounts for July 1st forward is make sure that you have some thought around your beneficiary elections. We find that over time, beneficiary elections potentially can be stale or out of date. And the nice part about retirement plans is that if something, well, this isn't the nice part, if something were to happen to you, beneficiaries are receiving money as a non-probatable asset. So it's important to have those beneficiaries declared and up to date. So this might give you a new opportunity to kind of look at that. And when you go online, we're going to have an online registration for your beneficiary. So important to take a look at that. For anyone who doesn't yet have time to look at the platform and has signed a salary reduction agreement continuing their deferral, if you don't have time to make your allocation, one will be made for you. You'll default into what's referred to as a target date fund, for those that might be familiar with it, which relates to your age and time to retirement and creates a mix of investments relative to that time frame. Okay, so on July 1st, 2018, here's some dates that we talked about a minute ago, and we'll just make sure that we cover. The new investment menu will be offered. You'll actually have access to see that today and make decisions around it effective in June when we open up the site, and I'll take you through those dates in a second. All new contributions will go into the new investment. Your election for allocations will be honored, and if you don't, as I mentioned, have an opportunity to do that, they'll default to the target date fund. On the assets that you have in the current investment, you can leave those in the TIA accounts or the VALIC accounts that you already have accumulated funds in, and they can stay there for as long as you wish to keep them there. Secondly, you can also direct those assets into the new platform if you find that to be a more desirable place for those assets. So first pay with funds to the new platform, 7/20, July 20th, which reflects all of your earnings after June 30, will now have to go into the new investment platform for the Midway employees. Your action steps are really the things that I've just spoke to, and we'll have more communication going through that. But we think it's very important to get you off to a good start, so we're going to create some on-site meetings. And the first, we wanted to make sure that the faculty had an opportunity to meet with Mark and our team prior to their departure for the summer after the semester ends. So faculty meetings will be scheduled Thursday, May 10th, May 11th, and May 15th. And then we're going to follow that up after our system goes live so you can use the enrollment site on June 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st. And so anyone who will need to see us at that point, and there will be additional dates actually added to that as well. At that point, we can actually help you invest or not help you enroll. You won't have to do it on your own on the site. You could also use Mark as a conduit to help get that information into the enrollment site. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joey Payne, who's going to walk you through the investment platform.
Thanks, Don. And I promise I'm going to keep this at a very high level. I'm not going to get down in the weeds on talking about investments. One of the, as Don said earlier, one of the advantages of having a third party review the investments is we can take a look at all the investments that are available and what are appropriate to be in a employer-sponsored retirement plan. And we can recommend those funds to the institution. Previously, when you have a vendor and you don't have a third-party consultant, then the investments that are offered are those that are recommended by the vendor. And typically, the vendors recommend their own funds. So that's the beauty of having a third party. You can have the best-in-class funds. So what we're talking about is having the full gamut, going from fixed investments all the way up through growth investments and real estate. I actually prefer to look back here. So this chart, what it does is it kind of on the bottom left, this is the lower end of the risk scale. If risk is going this way. And then, historically, the more risk you're willing to take, the higher the returns. So money markets, fixed investments, bonds tend to be the least riskier investments. And then when you start, get up in here to the middle, this is where you're talking about large cap growth funds. So you're talking about funds that might be in like the S&P 500 or, you know, companies that are household names. And then as you go up the risk scale and you get into the small companies, these are the companies that are up and coming, and some of them are household names, but they're just smaller companies. It may be regional, could be, you know, things like retail, restaurants, et cetera. And then, you know, when you start looking at foreign investments, you know, you get into investments that are in organized and developed countries versus emerging markets. So that the emerging markets tends to be the most risky. So as Don mentioned earlier, at a high level, there's two ways that you can go into the plan. The first way is choosing to go into the target date fund, and I have a couple slides that I'll cover here in a minute. Or the second option is to actually go into the new investment array that we've put together. And you can do that on your own or with the help of the local ballot representative. So this slide here is just really kind of like the gamut of the investment categories that you could potentially go into as a plan. And then this next page, these are actually the investments that we've chosen, that we've recommended as a firm to Midway, that have been accepted and put in. And, you know, you'll notice that there's Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, Lord Abbett, Templeton, you know, so we can totally choose whatever investments that are out there in a specific category based on their performance and also looking at the cost of those investments. So target date funds have been around for a while, and these funds, they follow what's called a glide path. And this glide path is historically in the top left-hand corner, that's what the percentage of the investment that's in equities or stocks. And so over time, as you move along towards retirement, that fund will actually start selling off stocks and buying fixed investments as you get closer to retirement age. So you can legally, your employer can tell you, if you say, well, what fund should I go into? And you're like I said, well, how old are you? And you say, well, I'm 40. And okay, in 25 years, you'll be 65. This is 2018, so 25 and 18 is 2043. And these funds typically are based on every 5 years. So in that example, we could tell somebody to go into a 2045 fund. And so over on the right, this talks about, you know, the types of underlying investments that are actually being utilized in the investments. And then down here at the bottom, you know, so these are hypothetical retirement dates. Now, there is sometimes when we look at a plan and we look at how people are invested, it makes absolutely no sense to go into more than one of these funds. Okay, because you're already getting a broad range of investments, but we've seen where somebody has said, well, I'll take 10% in this fund and 10%, you know, and all you're doing is buying the same investments over and over and over. So just one choice. That's, the government and people in the investment industry have come up with this target date fund concept. So it's basically one-stop shopping. So, and it's considered a prudent decision where you are invested highly in equities in the short run, and then over time the fund reduces, you know, somewhere around 35-40% when you get out towards retirement. So in the growth of target date funds have certainly increased, and you know, it became a qualified default investment alternative, which meant, you know, back in the early days, as Trish said, when I was a plan administrator, if somebody came in and said, where should I put my money? You know, I couldn't say anything. I could say, well, here are your options, and, maybe point to some pie charts and things like that. But at the end of the day, I could not tell them what to mark on their piece of paper. But today, Trish could say, okay, how old are you, and will you be 65? And legally, that is considered an acceptable way to enroll in a plan. So the Tier 2 investments, these are the investments that we looked at earlier. And at a high level, you can break those investments into two categories, active and passive. Fixed investments are certainly something that, here's the 2%, are certainly something that could be a part of your overall portfolio, but we don't recommend that anybody put all of their money in one investment unless it's a target date fund. You should have a diversified investment portfolio. Money market accounts, interest rates are starting to come up a little bit now, but in the past 5 years or so, money market accounts have been breaking even at best. So this is really just a place to park money, and maybe you're thinking about making some changes, within, a few months or something like that, but it's certainly not a place, where your accumulation is poised for significant growth. Okay, so what I'm going to do now for the next few slides is I'm just going to point out, kind of how to read this information, and I'm not going to go through every investment, but I want you to understand, how to read this information, and then I think Trish is going to have this PowerPoint online, and so if you wanted to go back and look at it. But, what this is doing is it's talking about what the expense ratio is. So that expense ratio is what you're paying for the investment itself. And so obviously, that's something we looked at when we put these investments in the menu, is finding those investments that are high performing for that investment category, but have lower cost as well. And then over on the right-hand side, this kind of gives you what the underlying holdings are in those funds. I'm going to flip ahead to some of the stock funds. Okay, so here you should see some household names. So this is large value, and over here it talks about what the investment criteria is. Value stocks typically pay dividends. They're not in that growth mode, and so they pay out steady dividends to keep investors, to invest in their stocks. And, you get to see like Microsoft, Chevron, Wells Fargo, BlackRock, Apple, so you could see a lot of, and then over here, this is how much of the portfolio, what the weight is of the portfolio. And then over on the right-hand side is what sector of the economy they participate in. And then, a large blend fund, this is the Fidelity S&P 500, then you're going to see, because it's blend, you're going to have, value and growth stocks in here, and the different sectors. And then finally, when you're looking at large growth, you see some of the companies listed there. So I'm going to just kind of move ahead. Like I said, my goal was that, you look at the fund up here, you can look at the expense ratio. This is the investment strategy. We'll look at like the top 10 holdings, and that gives you kind of an idea of how much of that. So this large growth, Amazon's taking over the world, I think. It's got 8.85%, and then Amazon sells everything just about. Skipping ahead, looking at some of the foreign stocks, and over here it shows you what country that they're in. All right, and then finally at the end, there's definitions. So if you like definitions, I like definitions. So if you see something on the handout that you have, and I believe the handout you have does have some good definitions at the end. And so that might help make a little more sense. So at the end of the day, you know, you have two options when you go to enroll. You can, when you go online to set up your account, you can go through and check the target date fund. That's your age appropriate target date fund when you're going to be age 65. It's just a placeholder that is used for these target date funds. Or the second option is you can choose your own investments. And so to help you with that choice, VALIC has tools. If you're doing it yourself, you can go online, and whether you're doing it online or you're meeting with Mark, you have to go through an advice session. And this is where you're going to answer questions about your attitude towards risk. And so at the end of this questionnaire, it's going to stratify you as a growth investor or a conservative investor. And then based on that, it's going to suggest a mix of investments for you to go into and specific percentages that you can go into. So you can do it yourself, going through that questionnaire, or you can meet with Mark. And what you're getting with the funds that are in the tier 2, the core lineup, you are getting a tailored investment portfolio versus if you do the tier 1, you're getting an average investment portfolio. You know, for example, if you already work for the state and you're getting a pension, which is considered kind of a fixed investment, then because of your age, your portfolio might suggest, going into the target date fund, that it has a good percentage in fixed investments. Well, you already have, because you have a pension, you already have a lot of money in fixed investments. And so you can take that into consideration, Mark can, and based on how you answer the questions on the online tool, it can consider that as it relates to your overall investment strategy. So this is just an example. But I think, like I said, I promised to try to keep this at a high level, and that's what we're doing. And so I believe at this point we're at the end of our formal presentation, and we wanted to save enough time to answer your questions. So I think Trish and Leah are in the back, and they have microphones. Don, you want to come up here? And, we'll take whatever questions that you have. So raise your hand if you totally understand what you need to do before July 1st. Okay.
Not that close. Hi. So if we are one of the folks who have stuff with TIA, are our only options to leave it there and roll it to VALIC, or if we have outside investment like an IRA, can it roll into that?
That's a great question. And so the answer is, well, typically because they're ending that plan, that gives them the ability to actually to roll that money to something other than this plan, right?
Yeah, is the question, can I roll money?
To the IRA.
To the TIA?
No, to an IRA.
To an IRA.
Because you haven't canceled the plan, so I can't know. The plan hasn't been terminated, it's just been changed. So the answer would be no, you can't do the IRA. You have to keep the money in the plan, and there's an umbrella over the plan which considers new investments and old investments. And so the old VALIC and the old TIA money is still there. You know, the good news is, first of all, let me say something about TIA. We recommend TIA all the time. And honestly, because this is a small plan, TIA, it didn't make economic sense for them to put a lot of resources into the plan as far as going forward. And so that's just being transparent with you why TIAA, and frankly, VALIC was. So what you're going to find is a lot of the investments that we're going to offer through the VALIC Mutual Fund platform are going to be lower cost to you depending on what investments you were with TIAA. The good news is that you can keep the money in those TIAA accounts. You can continue to go to Lexington and meet with them at the TIAA office over on South Harrodsburg Road. And you can also call the 800 number and work with them there. They're willing to do that. And whenever you retire or leave from Midway, you'll have the chance at that point that you can roll the money back to your TIAA Midway account or to your IRA at that point in time, because you have to separate from service. If this plan was being terminated, then that would give you that would be a trigger to allow you to go to an IRA, but it's not being terminated. We're just changing how the record keeping is done. So, very good question. What other questions? The one thing about IRAs, because the money is just in one account, you don't have economies of scale. And so typically, if you're in a plan that has any size to it at all, you should, depending on how the plan's being managed, find lower cost investments. So I'm not sure where, now some employers do have rules that when you leave, you have to take the money out. But as a general rule, when you leave, you want to have an advisor in the laws that are in the process of being changed now as it relates to investment advice. That's one of the things that advisors have to look at is, historically they would say, oh, roll it into an IRA that we can manage. But they actually have to take a look at the investments that are being offered in that employer plan and how you're, the cost and what's available versus, what you can have in an IRA. So it's not automatic to go to an IRA anymore. Sure.
And just to confirm, so when we're with TIAA, we can move that money to VALIC now, or you want to move it to TIAA?
No, so the question was, if we're with TIAA now, can we move the money to VALIC? And the answer is yes. And probably the best thing to do would be to have an appointment with Mark. There's some paperwork that you would need to complete, and they're going to send out some information to you and tell you what to bring to that meeting. So, like, you need your TIAA craft contract numbers, things like that, and they can help you fill out the paperwork, and that money will transfer over to the new VALIC plan, and no taxable event or anything like that. So.
And are there fees attached to that transaction?
No, the only thing that with TIAA, if you're in the TIAA traditional investment, that's a fixed annuity, there's no fees to take the money out. It just takes time. And so it takes 9 years. They make 10 installment payments over a 9-year period to take the money out of that fixed investment. But if your money's in stock, TIAA real estate, any of the mutual funds, that money can move over immediately, and there is no cost associated with that transfer. There's somebody behind you, and then I'll get you next. Yes.
So would it be more financially beneficial to roll the money over into the VALIC account from the TIAA CREF? Because I'm thinking it would be sitting there, not doing anything.
Well, it is doing something. It is invested, unless you're in a money market account, it is invested in some kind of an investment. And there is no simple answer to that. The answer is it depends. It depends on what investments that you're in at TIAA, on whether or not it makes sense to actually pull that money out, right now. The only way to get that answer would be to sit down with Mark and let him analyze what the investments you're in now, what the performance of those investments, the cost of those investments, and then how that might compare to what is being offered in this plan. But you cannot answer that with a specific, oh yeah, just move it over, because in some cases, and I could name off some investments that if you're in on TIAA in this plan, you would be better to just move the ballot and bring that money with you. But there are some investments that are in the Midway plan under TIAA that it might make sense for you to retain those. So it just depends.
And I'll add into those comments. We're going to have a checklist of the things that might be helpful to bring to a meeting that you'll have with Mark or with the folks here at VALIC. And one of those items for the folks with TIAA will be bring your statement, bring any other financial information that you think is appropriate relative to us helping you guide through the process. And so we'll give you a bit of a checklist so you come to those meetings prepared. In that first session, we'll have some discussion about what to do, how to do it, et cetera. So it will be fairly simple, but we'll need your information to kind of help guide through the process.
Yeah. Can we get the microphone for a moment? Sorry. We are recording this for anybody who's not here, so that's why we're asking people to use the microphone. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone.
Okay, so say that we had invested in a target fund with a previous employer. Can we then transfer those funds into the current VALIC plan?
Great question. The plan is controlled by a plan document here at Midway that has the conditions of what you can and cannot do, so that's a great question, and thank you for asking that. It does provide and permit rollovers into the plan, just as it does provide for rollovers out of the plan once you separate service. So this is a good time potentially to take stock, no pun intended, in what you have and sit down and say, am I managing all of my assets efficiently? The other thing I wanted to remember to tell you folks is that there's a program inside of VALIC's online support system where you'll be able to register if you're a TIA participant or if you have IRAs outside. You can register that asset, and when you go onto our site through single sign-on logic, it will actually bring that up so you can do your planning in one environment without having to go to 3 different sites. So Mark will help you with that, or we can teach you how to register those assets to make it a little less complicated for those that have assets in one place.
And to answer the question that you asked, it depends. If you work for a large employer, let's say like Toyota, because of their economies of scale, there's a good chance that that target date fund is being offered at a lower cost than what the target date funds are in this plan. On the other hand, if it was a very small employer, then there's a good chance that this could be a better option for us. So that's why they need to look at the actual investments that you're in the share class, and they can determine, Mark and others can determine whether it makes sense for you to bring that in. You guys are asking great questions. Any more?
Are there any other questions for them while they're here?
Okay, so since there's not any more questions right now, we'll kind of go ahead and wrap this one up. Please know that we will be communicating routinely over the next several weeks to a few months before we roll out in July to try to get all your questions answered that you do have. If for some reason you don't want to ask it today, we're going to stick around for a few minutes if you want to come up and ask on an individual basis. As well as we're available, Diane and I are in our offices. We're glad to answer whatever questions we can for you all. And if we don't have those answers, we can put you in touch with the resources that you're going to need to be able to get those questions answered.